Man, I love Canada. It's my favorite state. I mean, I'm not wrong, it's a sovereign state. Scott Pilgrim versus the world. That's right, he's gonna fight every individual person in the world. You better prepare yourself. Back in the 90s, there was a Canadian indie rock band called Plumtree. Then in 1997, they created a song called Scott Pilgrim. Brian Lee O'Malley, who's also Canadian, heard the song and was inspired to create the character of Scott Pilgrim, and then a graphic novel series surrounding that character. In total, he made 6 books, lasting from August of 2004 to July of 2010. And no, I haven't read them yet, but after the release of the first book, his publisher, Oni Press, had decided that the world had gone long enough without a Scott Pilgrim movie. At first, O'Malley was worried that they would ruin it, specifically with the casting, but ultimately he agreed to it, mainly because he was a starving artist who needed the money. Fortunately, he was very involved with the scriptwriting process, and there were even some lines written for the movie that eventually made their way to the book, including lines written by Michael Bacall, who wrote 21 Jump Street, and Edgar Wright, who directed the Cornetto trilogy and this movie. The screenplay was completed in October of 2007, on what was originally going to be the start of the Writers Guild of America strike. Then the casting process took place in 2008. Edgar Wright took pride in the fact that the cast had a range of A-list actors, unknown actors, and everywhere in between. The next year, 2009, was when filming began. Universal Studios originally wanted to film it in New York, and that's a fact that belongs in a joke book. The crew absolutely refused to live in that timeline, so they decided to shoot it in Toronto, Canada instead, because not only is Scott Pilgrim set in Toronto, it's set in very specific parts of Toronto. So filming somewhere else, you might as well just commit treason against Canada, or use maple-flavored syrup instead of pure maple syrup. Fittingly, they shot the ending scene last after rewriting it. And not only was it shot well after the rest of the movie, but it was also shot only 3 months before the movie's release date in August of 2010. We open with an 8-bit Universal logo and some exposition about how 22-year-old Scott Pilgrim is dating Knives Chow, who's 17. The people in his life disapprove, of course, because that relationship is also treason against Canada. They have an age gap of probably 7 football fields. I'm American. But on the other hand, Ellen Wong, who played Knives, is actually 3 years older than Michael Cera, who played Scott. And they haven't made it past the hand-holding stage, but before they can, Scott falls in love with another girl and completely loses interest in Knives. He did kinda have her as more of a rebound crush than a genuine love interest. For someone as unassuming as Scott, he's got a surprisingly long and messy dating history. The new girl's name is Ramona Flowers, and she's American, closer to Scott's age, and also his dream girl. Literally, she showed up in his dreams. And in order to be with her, he has to fight all 7 of her exes, or as they call themselves, the League of Evil Exes, because her exes are literally evil. They also act like video game bosses, which leans into the whole gaming aesthetic this movie's going for. Speaking of which, the presentation is what really makes this movie. It has a very distinct visual style that takes inspiration from video games, comic books, and this one movie from the 60s. And as a result, there's an energy to this movie that you won't find in a lot of other movies. The main complaint I've seen people have of this movie is that it's style over substance. And yeah, sure, it isn't that deep and a lot of the characters aren't good people, but it is a comedy, and in my opinion, the comedy absolutely lands. And this might sound a bit mean-spirited, but sometimes the punchline can involve laughing at the incompetence of the characters. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is a great example of this, and while the style of comedy might not be for everyone, I kinda like it sometimes. The movie's also got great visual comedy, and the over-the-top villains are absolutely hilarious. And one last thing in terms of substance, I feel like Scott, Ramona, and Knives all got decent character arcs in this movie. Scott learns to take accountability for his actions, Knives gains more of a sense of self, and Ramona learns to stop running away from her problems. When the film first came out, despite having some modest hype around it in the fan base, it bombed pretty hard at the box office, making back $50 million of its $85 million budget. But fortunately, in the years since, it seems to have grown a bit of a cult following, and I would consider myself to be a member of that cult, and I consider this movie to be the opposite of treason against Canada. In conclusion, pure maple syrup is better than maple-flavored syrup.